Hey guy, what's the deal with the knife? And he was the same age as me, which was 55 at the time. And he looks at me and goes, yeah, my mom made me bring that.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, brought to you by 180 TAC. Get out there and have some fun.
Hey, hope you had a good weekend. One thing I wanted to say before we got started was I'm sorry for the audio quality of this show. Just not a great connection, and did the best we could with it, but it's still a really good episode. Also, if you'd like to call us and leave us a voicemail about, a story you've had happen over the summer or something interesting that happened recently with the outdoors or with adventure sports, give us a call. We'd love to hear about it. You can leave us a voicemail at 812-MAIL-POD. That is also 812-624-5763. We'd love to hear some stories, and we're definitely willing to put them on the podcast, so call us. Also, we are on our way to making a goal of having 50 patrons by the end of November. So if you've been thinking about becoming a patron of the show, please do it. This show takes time and energy to create, and we would love to keep producing it at an excellent level, and you can be a big part of that. So thanks for your support. Don't forget to review us on iTunes, share us with your friends, and let's get this thing going. So back to the show. Welcome to the show. Today we have a pretty extraordinary story. Craig Christensen. He would tell you that he doesn't have a story or that he isn't extraordinary, but the man is 125 miles from cycling 100,000 miles. Is that right, Craig?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, by the way, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, you've done some awesome stuff. You've biked across America. You've done tons of trips, the Ragbri. You've backpacked the West Highlands way in Scotland. You've spent time backpacking in New Zealand. Tons and tons of bike trips, obviously, to get 100,000 miles. But what would you say? You're just kind of a casual adventurer?
Yeah, one thing my wife and I like to call ourselves is the perfect happy medium. We listen to your podcasts of these people that are, rode the ocean and done the polar caps on skis, and just the list goes on. But we're in our upper 40s and 50s, and I think one of the messages we have out there is there is such thing as a happy medium out there, and we feel like we're kind of ticking a lot of the boxes on that and hopefully can inspire people our age that they can still get out and do that. If you're in reasonably good shape and you're motivated, it's never too late to start this stuff.
Oh, absolutely, man. I totally agree. A lot of people feel they're, just so far behind in achieving things like this, but you'll realize that these types of adventures are not done in a day. They are done over time, and when you take one day out of all the miles you've pedaled, it doesn't feel like you're doing much, but when you look back, it's extraordinary what you can accomplish over just a few years,
Yes.
So you rode your bike across America back in 95, is that right?
Yes.
Why don't you tell us about that trip? What was that about?
Okay, well, let me back up a little bit. I want to kind of put some plug out there to my parents.
Okay.
When I was 12 years old, my dad worked for a company that built fiberglass canoes and sailboats and campers and things. And one day he brought home a 12-foot fiberglass canoe for me. And this would have been back in the early 70s, and back in a time when, we were fortunate enough to have a lot longer leash than kids do today. And he would take me out in the country to a local river, and he would drop me off at 12 years old by myself, and he'd say, when you get tired of paddling, just walk to the nearest farmhouse and call me and I'll come get you. Yeah, it just doesn't happen nowadays. And then when I was 14, the Ragbri came through our town as a pass-through town. That's the Register's annual Great Bike Ride Across Iowa that's been going on since the early 70s. And when I was 14, it came through my town, and I asked my mom if I could jump on my bike and join it. And she said, of course not. There's too many hoodlums. And it really bummed me out. But so the next day I came up with an alternative plan. I figured out a 3-day bicycle tour by myself, where the first day was an 80-mile trip to my grandma's house. The second day was a 50-mile ride to my sister's house, and then the third would have been back home again, about 40-some miles. And she said, yes, yeah, that's fine. You can go by yourself. So I was on a 38-pound bike carrying a backpack strapped to my seat rails with twine and a floor pump, and I did it at 14 years old by myself. And I look back at that, and it's all happened from there because my parents, they never worried. They've always encouraged me. My wife's parents are the same way. And so anyway, then years later, my previous wife and I we started doing Ragbris back then. In 84, I think, was our first one. And then in 95, getting up to that ride across America, was a columnist for the Des Moines Register, Chuck Offenberger, said he was going to ride across America. And was there anybody out there that wanted to come along? And I said to my wife at the time, I said, I'm going. If you want to come with, great. And luckily she did. And we had a 7-year-old son at the time. So we figured out a way that he could go along too in a support vehicle at 7 years old. And so that was called the Iowa 150, and the 150 was in reference to the celebration of the state sesquicentennial. And so, yeah, there ended up being about 300 of us, and it was 5,000 miles and 100 days, and along the way, our role was to promote the state of Iowa, whether we were from there or not. That was our role, so each day we would, put in our plugs for Iowa everywhere we were, and we developed the group of 300 people. Was, to this day, we're still keeping touch, and there's reunions, and there was a documentary made on it at the time, I believe it's called The Great American Bike Ride. It was produced by Tim Crescenti, who went on to bigger things too. He even has a part in producing one of those shows on TV, the one with Terry Bradshaw and Henry Winkler, the Better Late Than Never. So his career kind of used that as a springboard too. And so anyway, like I said, my 7-year-old son got to go along and experience that, and we made it to D.C., and then that, like I said, to this day, we're still keeping in touch with all those people.
That's pretty incredible. Yeah, doing anything like that is going to build a community. I mean, it's so developmental of an experience. But I wanted to go back to when you were 14. We went bike touring before bike touring was really a big thing. That was quite a while ago now, and it's kind of funny. Your mother wouldn't let you ride in that big ride, but she let you go by yourself a few years later.
Yeah, we still laugh about that a lot.
I remember my first bike trip. I was 21 when I came back, and it was from Alaska down to Florida. And when I got back the next day, I wanted to ride. I got to my mom's house, and I wanted to ride to my dad's house. They live about 3 miles apart. Well, I was like, Mom, I want to ride my bike to Dad's house this morning. She goes, you can't do that. It's dangerous. And I'm like, I just rode 5,300 miles across Canada in the wilderness, and I can't ride 3 miles through a little town in Florida. It was funny. So parents, man, it's funny, the some of the logic sometimes, but, they love us, and that's what's important. So you did that first ride, and you did the 150-mile ride that was celebrating the sesquicentennial.
Well, that was 5,000 miles. It was just called called the Iowa 150. Yeah, a lot of people confuse that. They think it's one of those 150 rides for MS or whatever. It's like, no, it was.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was 5,000. Yeah.
So, man, and so how was that experience for you as a family with a 7-year-old?
Oh, absolutely unbelievable. Along the way, they had kind of got a 16-year-old guy to go along as the group mechanic, and his name was, I want to talk about this guy a minute. His name was Charlie Whitmack. He was 16 years old, and he was going along as our mechanic. But being a 16-year-old, he was kind of goofy, and I helped him out a lot of times with the bike repair, and
You're probably cheap labor, huh?
yeah, exactly. But anyway, Charlie then went on to become the first Iowan to summit Everest.
Wow.
And I had mentioned in one of my emails that's another guy you need to contact because, his story is incredible too. But one of the things Charlie has told people in his motivational talks and TED Talks, those kinds of things, is one of his themes is choose your own Everest. And my wife and I really echo that a lot, that, everybody thinks they can't do what he's doing or they can't do what we're doing. And Charlie's message is choose your own Everest, which means, if your Everest is to go out and run a 5K, then great, go for it. And he's one of my inspirations to this day, that when we start feeling like, what we're doing is not that big a deal, we always look back at Charlie's words, choose your own Everest. Yeah, it's great words to live by.
So what's your Everest?
Well, I guess, every year it's a different, like this year it was the West Highland Way, and hardcore backpackers that have been there and done everything would say, that's not that tough. But, it was very difficult, and it was our Everest, and we're very proud of it. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, what was the West Highland Way like? I'm actually not too familiar with that. What is that?
That's a 100-mile trail in the Highlands of Scotland that goes from Glasgow northwest to Fort William on the west coast of Scotland. We were looking through Backpacker magazine, and it was listed as one of those, must-do hikes in the world that's really world class. And so we just on a whim chose to do that, and we just did that this August. It was incredible. Like I said, it was 100 miles, but we threw in a side trip where we climbed Ben Nevis, which is the highest peak in the UK. But other than that, the weather was rainy and cold and windy, and there were days where we were walking through the moors, which is like the most uninhabited area of Scotland, in what comes across as the most miserable weather you've ever seen. And, we were laughing and having a good time. The whole trip was just great. And I tell people, well, it helps when you have good gear. We had really good rain gear, and that, we just live for that stuff where other people would
probably avoid that.
Yeah, avoid
sounds
that.
Pretty miserable, honestly. But I know what you're talking about. It's that type 2 fun,
Yeah, the other thing that's really unique about, well, not unique so much, but one thing we've noticed on the West Highland Way, Scotland still allows wild camping on private land. They're fiercely protective of their right to walk anywhere in their country. And there are a few areas in the national parks where they've had to clamp down on it because of, bad practices by tourists. But for the most part, you can camp anywhere. And once we finally figured that out, it really, really lowered the stress level, where we knew at the end of the day, if there wasn't a designated camping area, there were these unbelievable campsites right out of the pages of any great magazine. And, you had everything you needed: a rushing river to filter water from, trees to break the wind occasionally, and good people around you. And it was just phenomenal.
Oh, man, that sounds incredible. Do you have any stories from that trip? Something interesting that happened?
On that trip, there weren't any really crazy stories. I got to eat haggis, and if people don't know what haggis is, it's kind of the national dish of Scotland. It's kind of a meatloaf made out of sheep innards, and it was quite good. We learned some other terms from the locals that we laughed about a lot, called faffing about. We were hiking along with these two old English gentlemen who, one was always complaining how his partner was always stopping to adjust his gear and whatnot, and he called that faffing. And so sure enough, now we use that term if one of us is not moving along like they should because they keep wanting to stop faffing about. We were out in the middle of the nowhere one day, and we came upon this bar. It was called a Walker's Bar, and I went in there and got to sample some scotch, which the amount of scotch over there is absolutely mind-blowing. That's
right.
They're really known for it.
It's falling from the sky.
Yeah. Took that first sip and thought, yeah, that's not bad at all. It's pretty smooth. And then took a second sip and thought, nah, that's whiskey. No thanks. Yeah.
That's funny, man. That sounds like an incredible trip. And
another thing about that, when we first got there, we did have a hotel the first night to get our ducks in a row, and there was a little lady sitting behind the counter of the hotel that was a clerk, and she was just like a little Mrs. Doubtfire, and she saw us walk in with our backpacks, and we were carrying about 30 pounds each, and she asked us what we were doing, and we told her we were going to do the West Highland Way, and she goes, "Are you carrying all your gear?" And this story loses something because I can't do her accent. But when we said we were doing the whole thing, carrying all our gear, she said, "Oh, you would be proper walkers." And I thought that was kind of a neat term, that we were, the fact that, because there was a lot of tour companies and a lot of day hikers where they haul your gear from place to place to place. And but she called us proper walkers, and we got a kick out of that, because when I talk about being the happy medium, we look at those and hike your own hike. That's, another saying I'm sure you've heard of, is when we see those people that are using the tour companies and having their stuff hauled for them. I don't criticize those people not 1 second, because we look at it and say, yeah, that'll be us someday. But we'll keep on doing it our way for now, as long as we can, even though we tend to be surrounded by 20-somethings. But, we're going to keep doing it as long as we can.
Absolutely. And, that's a great point you mentioned. Not everyone's where you are, and either below you or above you. I take a lot of people backpacking, or through, I rent a lot of people gear. And a lot of people, it's their first time. They don't know anything. They need basically a whole course on how to backpack, outdoor ethics, leave no trace principles. And our trails that we send people on aren't extreme, because you want people to ease in. You want them to fall in love with it. And if they're getting out there, I don't care if someone's carrying around. If they're getting out there and they're able to see it, you don't know what that starts in them to carry on later in life. When I first started going out in the woods, some expert would look at me and say, "Wow, what an idiot." But, I didn't know anything. But as I learned and as I grew this appreciation and love, you got to realize that other people aren't where you are. And I think that's awesome, though. But it is cool to be a proper hiker versus one that's getting your gear carried for you.
Yeah, and I got to give my wife, Suzie, been remarried for about 10 years now, and or 8 years, and I got to give her all the credit in the world, because when we met, I was 100% a cyclist and was into the touring, and she was a backpacker. And so she introduced me to the backpacking, and I introduced her to the cycling. And so now we try to balance, like, for instance, on the Ragbrise, we tend to go every other year now instead of every year, just because we go, no, on those odd years, let's find a big backpacking trip to do. So, and we both love both sports. So
that's awesome.
If you want to get into backpacking, but you're not sure where to start, go check out campcrate.net. Campcrate can help you plan the backpacking trip of a lifetime and supply you with all the rental gear you need. Simply go online and choose your gear and your itinerary. Campcrate will then ship your gear anywhere in the U.S. When your trip is finished, use the pre-printed return label to ship the gear back. It's that easy. Campcrate. Rent, explore, return.
So what's some of the trips that's on your bucket list for backpacking?
For backpacking, we'd like to hit the John Muir Trail. That's a goal of ours. We'd like to do maybe some section hiking on the AT. We'd like to hit the north. Neither one of us have been to the northwest, like up in the Cascades or up in that area. And the funny thing is, we're both scared of bears.
Right.
We are trying so hard to learn how to not be scared of bears. Well, I said, well, what we should do, we need to go up to the northwest, and we actually need to hire a guide, someone that is familiar with bears, and just spend a 3-day trip or something with a guide and learn just how to carry yourself, how to not be afraid of bears. Because we've hiked in bear country. We know how to hang a bear bag and use all the precautions and carry bear spray. But, until you're really around someone that's really good at it, we feel like we need that to learn,
Yeah, man, we've encountered a lot through our bike touring and backpacking as well. And Grizzly Country, one night in my tent, I had a grizzly bear come right up to my tent. And
oh my!
I mean, all I could do was lay there and not scream or cry, which might have done a little of both. But yeah, I don't think you, especially in the Northwest, man. We just came back from a trip there last weekend, and holy cow, I would highly recommend y'all getting out there to Olympic National Park, North Cascades, or anywhere around Mount Rainier, because you have this incredibly lush forest, the snow-capped peaks, and the ocean all together. It with all the animals involved in all of those ecosystems. It's incredible.
Yeah, the Scotland and New Zealand trips were both really like temperate rainforests, and that's what interests us about the Northwest, is because it kind of seems the same way. They seem like temperate rainforests, and we like that style.
Yeah, that would be perfect for you. So you've already seen some of that in New Zealand then.
Yeah, when we were riding across America in '95, we were in Yellowstone, and there was a father and a 14-year-old daughter with us. And one night he left his backpack. It wasn't a backpack, it was his duffel bag outside of his tent. And in the middle of the night, he heard some rustling around, and he opened up the fly of his tent, and he was literally face to face with a grizzly bear. So he zipped the tent back shut and wondered what he was going to do with his 14-year-old daughter. And, of course, eventually what the bear did was dragged the duffel bag away so he could tear into it. And that was the end of the story, except the next morning they got up and were examining their contents of their bag, and he had a big bottle of vitamin supplements in there that the bear got into. And so then we thought, great, now we got a bear all hopped up on speed out there.
So, man, you said you're 125 miles away from 100,000 miles on bike, and I kind of wanted to ask you about that. There's a book worth of stories in 100,000 miles of riding your bike. First of all, you must be pretty good at keeping details, because to know that you're only that far away, you must have been keeping pretty good track over the years.
Yeah, back in, I think, 1983, give or take, 84, I think it was, they came out with the first digital bicycle odometer, and my wife bought that for my birthday. And so I decided to start keeping track, and I have just diligently kept track year after year down to the mile with no goal, absolutely no goal in mind. Just I keep track for keeping track's sake. I'm kind of a numbers guy, and so it's been 43 states, 9 countries, 30 RAGBRAIs, across America once, then from Florida to Iowa in 2015, the Rhine River, and Eurovelo 15 in Europe. So, and then many different states. I used to have two friends where every year we'd pick a different state and we'd do a week-long self-contained tour. Our style over the years has been to wing it, which is getting more and more frustrating every year.
Oh, really?
And
Why?
I've heard people on your podcast talk about this same thing, where in this day and age of these reservation systems, where it used to be, you could just roll into a campground anywhere, or if you didn't want a wild camp or stealth camp, I should say, and you could go anywhere, plot a map in the morning, and just say, okay, let's go here, and now it's just getting so frustrating because you roll into places, nope, we don't have any room, we're all booked up because of these online reservation systems, and it's kind of been frustrating to dealing with that, but we won't give up.
No, I agree with you. We tried to book some campsites in Big Sur a few months ago, and everything, literally dozens and dozens and dozens of campgrounds, everything was booked up for months.
Yeah.
And I thought, you can't even plan to go somewhere without, then you just have to, I don't know, car camp or something, or figure out some sort of creative solution. And it is frustrating. Definitely. I definitely get that.
Yeah, when we were biking from Florida to Iowa, we were going through Missouri along the Katy Trail, and we stopped at a campground, and they told us that in Missouri that there's a law that says if you roll into a campground on a bicycle and they're booked up, they have to provide a spot for you.
Oh, man.
Which was really, really nice, knowing that.
No kidding.
And they do that for common sense reasons. If you're on a bicycle and it's, say, 15 miles to the nearest town and you're rolling in at dark, they actually realize it's not safe or convenient to have to turn you away and make you ride back on a highway in the dark to find a place,
That's great. Yeah, and if they can maintain some walk-up campground permits or whatever it is, if it's a backpacking route, if they can just have a handful of those for people that just want to show up.
Yeah,
exactly. I think that's ideal.
And in Europe, we ran into that all the time. In Germany, especially in Germany, France, and the Netherlands, that a lot of times the campgrounds we'd roll into were more like permanent RV types, where people set them there for the entire summer and go there on weekends. We ran into those a lot, but every single one we were ever in, when we'd come in on a bicycle, they'd say, oh, yeah, we'll find a spot for you. And they would find a spot for us. It might have just been a little patch of grass, but very, very accommodating. But then Europe's a much more of a bicycle culture, so,
Yeah, I book a lot of permits for backpacking trips, and you have to do a lot of research on different parks. And there's a lot of parks that will provide the same amount of permits that you can book online. They'll have the same amount reserved only for walk-up. So they split it like that, and which is very, very helpful.
Yes, yeah.
Hopefully that'll continue to grow as places get booked up. If you have money and have the time. And I honestly, I can't plan more than a month in advance. You might be different, but I honestly don't plan trips out incredibly detailed. I like to wing it, but it does bite you in the butt quite often.
Yeah. And you have to have, I go with my wife, and we both have good attitudes that winging it is still the best way and is the most fun. And does it cause stress? Yes, it caused stress at times, but it's still, knowing that you can go wherever you want. The thing that's scary is the size of the RVs just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, though.
Yeah, they killing machines is what I hear some bike tours call them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially, the rentable ones where, you go from driving a Prius for your everyday commute, and then you go to rent one of these giant white RVs that are huge. It can be pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
So on the 100,000 miles, man, tell me what most of those miles were. Was it training? Was it just casual riding? Not casual, but daily riding? Was it trips?
Well, in the 80s, I lived in South Texas, and bicycle racing was really, really big at that time. So back then it was a lot of hardcore road bike training, racing, and then I kind of started getting away from that and more into the self-contained touring. But other than that, commuting, I commuted. I was a school teacher for 26 years, and I commuted to work. It was 13 miles round trip to work almost every day. So that really was a big chunk there. And then, of course, I'd use summers to bite off the big chunks on tours.
So I was going to ask you, is that what your day job was, to provide all this freedom and ability to do adventures, teaching?
Yeah. I was a elementary classroom and then PE teacher. And so, yeah, I did my best to try and inspire the kids to get out and do that kind of stuff too.
Wow. And now, is that what you retired from, teaching?
Yes, teaching. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. I mean, my wife's an elementary school teacher.
This was all in South Texas, right on the Mexican border. So then when I retired in 2014, and my wife's a nurse, and she decided to take a year off, and we decided to travel for a year. So we were naturally trying to decide where to go first, what countries to do. And I told her, I said, well, I know all the stories about how great third world countries are and how wonderful the people are. And I said, I don't doubt that for 1 second. But after living in South Texas, one of the countries I said, first of all, I want to go where I don't have to fight the language, because I've spent 30 years fighting the language with Spanish, even though, it wasn't that bad. And then the other thing, living in South Texas, it's similar to Australia in that everything outside wants to kill you, whether it's a plant or an animal. Everything wants to kill you. So I said, she said, well, how about Australia? And I said, no. I'm tired of snakes and creepy crawlies. I want to go somewhere. So then we said, well, let's go to New Zealand. They don't have any indigenous, big animals or mean things. And so that's how we chose that. And so we did some of the great walks in New Zealand. I think there's like 9 of them. We chose 3. We'd already done a couple backpacking trips where we'd made absolutely every mistake in the book. And so we were starting to get a little more seasoned. So we went to Queenstown and used that as a base camp. And then we spent a month over there doing the separate Great Walks. And if people aren't familiar with that, just Google Great Walks of New Zealand, and it's just absolutely incredible, the experiences there. And one funny story we had over there was when we're in between the backpacking trips, we would stay at a hostel in Queenstown, and like the hostels are filled with world traveling 20-somethings. And the one hostel, we were lucky enough to get a private room, but to get to the bathroom, you had to go through the lounge area, and we called that running the gauntlet. Because, here I was 55 at the time, and my wife was 46, and so we were quite a bit older than the 20-somethings, and so it was kind of stressful running the gauntlet through the lounge. And so in the middle of the night, one night, I had to get up to use the restroom, and I'm walking through the lounge, and they're playing Monopoly. And there was probably half a dozen kids, I'll call them, playing Monopoly from all over the world. And as I'm walking by, I'm thinking, see, this is what's right with the world. You got this really cool lounge with people from all over the world, and they're playing Monopoly. So I go to the restroom, and on the way back, I'm walking through the same area, and I'm listening to them. You know how when you play Monopoly and you're losing and you're running out of properties, and you start bartering with your other playing partners to try and stay alive. Mm-hmm. And I noticed they were bartering with bags of weed. And I just laughed to myself and said, see, that is right. That's what's right with the world today.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, it was hilarious.
Oh man. Yeah, man, it's you know, there's horror stories out there of bad experiences in hostels, and everyone kind of does their own thing, and you'll realize so many people are just so kind-hearted and want to enjoy the experience just like you do, no matter what their age.
Yeah, and that's the theme I hear everywhere. Just all your podcasts, the theme is always the same. The people are always so wonderful.
I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned from bike touring and backpacking is that the world is not as bad as a lot of media makes it seem.
Right.
Person to person, I've stayed with people in the South, people in the North, you know, Democrats, Republicans, extremes in every way, Christians, atheists, and people obviously think differently with their ideals. But when it comes to treating people face to face, everybody treats you the same, with respect, with curiosity, and with kindness. No matter who their background, I realize it doesn't really matter. Everyone, when it comes to face, people just love each other.
Yeah. Over the years, I've traveled by myself, traveled with other guys, traveled with my wife. But one thing I've noticed over the years is if you throw a female into the group, whether it's just you and your wife or whatever, we get treated way better. And my theory on that is when I travel with a couple of friends I had, Paul and Dave, you know, we'd get 3-4 days growth of beard on and look like we'd call what we have the 10-mile stare in a 10-foot room when you roll into town. And people look at you a little hesitantly, but yet when my wife would go with us, we'd get the red carpet rolled out for us everywhere. And I always thought, you know, I think when they see a female, that immediately to most makes you less threatening. And we used to have a game we'd play on bike tours, my friends Paul and Dave and I, and it was called, not a game, but we started noticing that when the three of us would roll into a town, there was always, and I hate to use this phrase, but there was always a town loony, an eccentric person, maybe homeless or whatever. And we started noticing that we would attract the town loony before anyone else. So then we started having a point system for the entire tour of who would attract the most town loonies. And we had a good laugh about that. But they always said a lot of those trips I was traveling on a single recumbent, which wasn't fair because they said I myself looked like a town loony on a recumbent. So they were always protesting that. So.
Oh, yeah, man. I know exactly what you're talking about. These small towns out in the middle of nowhere. If there's somebody out there wandering around and they see you and you're on a bike, they're going to come talk to you.
Yes, they are.
They're going to want to hang out because, you know, you're exposed to the elements just like they are. And I've seen it dozens of times myself too, man. And honestly, a lot of times it makes a pretty good story, depending on what happens.
Yeah, and when we were coming from Florida up through the Panhandle, and I think we eventually got to the Natchez Trace, and we joined up with a solo guy that was riding from Baton Rouge or from New Orleans to San Francisco. So we rode with him for like 2 or 3 days, and he was pulling a Bob trailer behind his bike, and right on top of his bag there was a knife. It was a Bear Grylls brand hunting knife still in the package. And it was one of those plastic packages that are absolutely impossible to open. You know what I'm... Yeah, and so the first day we met him, we said, hey, guy, what's the deal with the knife? And he was the same age as me, which was 55 at the time. And he looks at me and goes, yeah, my mom made me bring that. And we laughed and we said, oh, that is hilarious. We go, and it's in that plastic that's absolutely impossible to open. So, you know, you're going to have a guy that's threatening you, and you're going to go, hold on a second. I got to get this knife open. And so he said, yeah, my mom made me bring it for protection. We laugh because, people ask you that all the time. What are you taking for protection? And one thing we heard somewhere, it's a good answer. We said, our wits.
Our wits. Oh,
Yeah.
man. Yeah, that's funny. Man, mamas don't change, do they? No matter how old you are, mamas ain't going to change.
That's right.
I tell you, man, that's a good point. Everyone, I'm from Florida, and a lot of people I know carry a gun around, just everyday use, and everyone asks, "What are you doing for protection?" I remember one time I was at the Canadian border, and they were like, "Do y'all have any weapons on you?" It was me and my friend touring, and I was like, "Nope, nothing. Like, we got a pocket knife." And he goes, "You don't have anything, bear spray, anything?" I said, we were in college, we were broke. I said, "Nope, we don't have anything." And the Border Patrol agent in Canada was like, "Well, you need something. There's grizzly bears out there." So,
My wife's Canadian, so I joke about that all the time when we cross the border to go up there. We go up there a lot, and I always said they're more interested in illegal fish than they are marijuana.
oh yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
You're from Florida, huh? Because the Florida trip, wow, that was an eye-opener there. That's one interesting state.
In
But,
what way?
well, for one thing, it was incredibly unsafe. We called it trying to get across through Florida on sidewalks.
As far as bike safety.
Oh yeah, it was just
Yeah,
it was
it's
so
one of the worst states for cycling.
Yeah, now the people were fine. We never had a problem with the people at all. They were all good, but just the trying to, in the morning we'd get up and we'd kiss each other and say, "Good luck, I hope we make it to the end of the day." But one of our favorite Florida stories is, and you may have to edit this out because this is way funnier if I don't hold back on this, but
All right, go for it.
we were out in the middle of nowhere in the Panhandle, and we're riding along through the country, and there's every now and then there's a mobile home. And so we're riding by this mobile home, and out in the front was a guy with a pickup truck with the hood up on the pickup truck, and he was working on the engine. And while he was working on the engine, his wife or whoever was sitting on the stoop with like a 10-year-old kid running around the yard. And as we're riding by in the morning, beautiful morning, we hear the wife yell at the husband. She yells, "It was my mom was on meth and your dad was on crack." And he replies to her, "No." He says, "My dad was on crack and your meth and your mom was on crack." And she goes, "No, it was the other way around. Get it right."
Oh my God.
And so my wife being the
Craig.
white Canadian that she is, she puts her head down and just stares straight ahead.
Oh, man.
And I'm right behind her waving at him, "Good morning."
Yeah. Oh my dude, that my wife lived up in the Panhandle and St. George Island for a few years, 3-4 years, and yeah, that place is called the Forgotten Coast for a reason. You will have trailer parks on the beach with some characters about like that story, just living their life right on the ocean. Like, it's unbelievable. You've never seen anything like it out there. That's hilarious, man. One thing I've noticed is bike touring creates a lot more stories for me because the people in the towns that you have to go through so often, and the amount of people you can come across in a day seem to increase because you're moving much quicker, and there's also normal travelers on the road. What's some other stories that you had from bike touring?
The Florida to Iowa trip, we used adventure cycling routes.
Yeah. Yep.
We had a tough time with those. The maps have incredible information, absolutely incredible information. They were so helpful. They're so colorful. They're detailed. They're waterproof, all that stuff. But the problem we had with their routes is, and it's no fault of theirs, is because of the problem with texting and driving, every state is starting to add these narrow rumble strips along the shoulder of the road to protect from texting. And what we noticed on roads that had, say, a very nice, say, 3-foot shoulder, paved shoulder, they put these rumble strips in, and whoever's driving the machine that puts the rumble strips in can't hold a straight line. And what it forced us to do on a daily basis was to ride in the traffic lane. And absolutely crazy the whole trip, just trying to stay alive. When we got to Missouri, we did have a bad experience in Missouri with some high school kids that purposely ran me off the road. And I went down and kind of tore my MCL, but I just kept riding because there's nothing you can do about that. And so that was a bad experience as far as people, but that can happen anywhere, anyhow. So we have another story. That happened in Alabama that I can't share with you because my wife says we're taking that one to our grave.
Okay.
But it was another story with encountering.
Don't admit any crime on the show. No, I'm just kidding.
No, exactly. And there was no crime, but it was a backwoods story that, and it was actually hospitality. The guy was trying to provide hospitality, but we ended up in a situation that I laugh at to this day, but she says, don't you ever tell anybody about that. So anyway, you talk about books worth of stories, and occasionally I'll get people asking about that. And I'm not really interested in the book thing, but one thing I'm really, really good about is journaling. And what I'll do is I'll keep a little notepad on every trip and just jot down the day and phrases and words to jog my memory. And then when I come home, I actually write it down, pen and paper. And this is really hard to do because, and this is kind of a lesson for people out there that, writing journals is hard, and going back and reading them isn't that important to me, but I have a grandson now. I always say I'm doing it for them, and I'm not only doing it for them, but think about what it would be like to read a handwritten journal from, say, your great-great-grandparents, people that are long gone that you never knew. And I always think that would be fascinating to read the stories of our ancestors on pen and paper. So my message to people is write it down. Even if it's not for you, somebody will be interested, regardless of how big of or small a trip it was. Reading historical accounts just is amazing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And there's so many small little interesting details to every day that when I'm touring, I totally forget about a month later, even, because every face, every inch of every road, everything I see is totally brand new. So to process all that over the course of months of a journey like that, it's incredibly hard to remember details. And I'll read through my old journals and see I totally forgot about that story. I'm so glad I wrote that down.
Yeah, and we use warm showers every now and then. You familiar with that?
Yes, I've used them plenty of times.
Yeah, for the listeners, it's the organization for bicycle tourists, and we used to host them a lot when we lived on the border because there were a lot of world travelers that crossed into Mexico right where we lived. So we had a huge number of great guests there. And then when we've gone on our trips, we use them, but we tend to use them maybe once a week because once again, you kind of have to organize it and make sure they're home and everything. But the warm showers hosts we've had over the years have been unbelievable. In Tallahassee, Florida, there's a guy down there that runs a kind of a bike hostel in an old building that used to be a pizza restaurant right on campus there, and we slept in that with cockroaches running around our heads all night. We stayed with some Mennonites in Alabama whose occupation were they ground fresh coffee beans and sold them, and they had us sleep in the shop where they ground the coffee beans, if you can imagine that smell. Or I should say aroma, all night long to the smell of coffee.
By now you certainly know who Bent Gate is. That's for a great reason. Bentgate Mountaineering has been sponsoring the Adventure Sports Podcast almost from the beginning, and we really appreciate that. They've made it possible for all the great shows to continue coming your way. We want to say thanks by reminding you to go to them for your backcountry gear. If you live in Colorado, then just stop by their store in Golden. If not, go to bentgate.com. They have what you need, from the latest ultralight gear to the tried and true classics for climbing, hiking, and camping, like Arc'teryx, Hilleberg, Nemo, Western Mountaineering, and many more. Need advice? They have you covered there too. Their staff are passionate adventurers who can offer help from their own experiences. Bentgate also hosts lots of events and speakers. Check out their website to see the schedule and to see all of their products. Help take care of the Adventure Sports Podcast by getting your gear from Bentgate Mountaineering.
Oh, and Ragbri. I want to talk about Ragbri just for a second, if you got it. Is over the 30 years of Ragbri. Have you ever done Ragbri?
No, I actually have never done it.
Yeah,
I've
well,
been invited a few times.
Yeah, that should be a bucket list on everybody's cycle list. In the early years, we went with a team called Team Plunger, and then I've told people I think I've probably done more Ragbris in different ways than anybody else, from riding a recumbent, a tandem recumbent, a road bike, hybrid, cross bike, mountain bike. We've gone with teams. We've stayed in the hosts. We've gone in an RV, we've stayed in the registrar's campground, but the last few years we've gone to self-contained, which is our absolute favorite way of doing it. Somebody asked us how we were doing Ragbri a couple years ago, and we said, well, we're going self-contained, and they said, oh, you're baggers. And we said, excuse me? And they said, you carrying all your stuff? And we said, yeah. And they go, yeah, you're bagging it. And we said, oh, okay, I guess we've never heard that term before, so now I guess we're baggers for Ragbri. But Ragbri, over the years, it started out as just a major, major party ride. And they've kind of cleaned it up over the years. It's better than ever. But in the early years, we were part of a group that we were at the back of the pack, coming in the dark, pretty trashed. Kind of grew out of that stage and remarried, and my wife now and I, we still enjoy the craft beers, but we don't do the party scene like we used to. And the thing about Ragbri is known for is every town the church ladies make pie, and they sell pie at their stands as fundraisers. And so in the early years, when we were partying and coming in late, I never saw pie on Ragbri. It was always packed up before we got into town. And now to this day, when we go, I still see some of those old friends from the early years, and they're still at the back of the pack, and they're still partying. And I ran into them one day, and I told them, I said, hey, yesterday I had pie. And they're like, you didn't have pie on Ragbri. There's no such thing as pie on Ragbri. I said, there is. I've seen it. So we joke that now instead of coming in late and wasted, we get there early and eat pie.
Get some pie. Oh man,
Yeah.
no, there's nothing better than a pie or cake or something after a long bike ride, man.
I still prefer the craft beers, though. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh man, pizza and beer. I mean,
Yep.
that can't be beat after a long ride, honestly. But some pie, to wash it down, of course. Yeah, so, I assume you're retired now?
Yeah, semi-retired. I have a little part-time job. I'm living in Iowa now, and I have a job. I just work a couple hours a day, but otherwise, yeah, retired. My wife's still working, hoping to semi-retire here this next year. We'd like to take bigger chunks and maybe do 2 or 3 month trips at a time, and we'd like to do a big West Coast swing. We're hoping where we do some, dirt bagging it, car camping, biking, backpacking, a little bit of everything.
Oh man,
She's never
There you
really
go.
done the West Coast yet, so
oh, you're in for a treat.
yeah, and we'd still
In
like
for a
to
treat.
get to some other countries too. I always say I don't have a bucket list anymore. I go by her bucket list because I'm really happy with the things I've done, and she kind of got a late start on all this. So I tell her, you make your bucket list and I'll tag along. I'm good for anything. So,
man, that's a good attitude. Good attitude. Well, it's a good place to be. Happy with what you've accomplished and looking forward to whatever she decides to come up with. Congratulations on getting to 100,000 miles.
Yeah, thank you very much.
125 to go. Maybe you missed a day or so. Maybe you got 100,000 already.
Right, could be. Yeah.
Well, congratulations. You don't have a website. You're not trying to promote yourself. So is there any way people can keep up with you or get in touch?
I do Facebook. It's just under my name, Craig Christensen. I'm a wood carver too, and about the only thing I'm on Facebook, I do promote my wood carvings. I've got about 200 different wood carvings in an album that I like to use that to show off. I do post pictures from recent trips, no journals or anything. I just kind of keep it simple.
I think I kind of am moving into that direction, just casually doing my adventures and not stressing out over trying to get sponsors or trying to get
right,
my name out there. I think that definitely takes away from the experience for most people.
Right.
I appreciate you being on the show, man. That's about all the time we have today.
Mm-hmm.
Any last minute advice or insight you want to share with the listeners?
One other thing, when I listen to your podcast over and over and over, and one of the things that I'm sure not just me, but everybody wonders is, they always wonder how people pay for some of the mega adventures. And, sometimes they explain, how they earn money while they're on the road, or they'll stop for a while and get a job. And in my entire life, my wife and I talk about how it's so difficult to decide the happy medium as to being a true dirtbag. And I mean that as a term of endearment. That's a compliment. A dirtbag lifestyle versus what most people in the world do is they think, oh, we'll wait till we're retired and then we'll travel. But you know as well as I know, and everybody knows, that physically that just isn't possible. That's when you're going to end up going on a cruise ship somewhere. And I feel like my wife and I was lucky enough to have a mentor when I was younger to get me started investing at a young age. And I chose a career that allowed me to do both, have a career, save some money, and travel during the summer. And yet, even without that, I'm very, very glad that, the whole money thing, because I worry a lot about these 20-somethings that are out there traveling the world and how they're living the life, and that's awesome. But I always think, what are you going to do? What are you going to do eventually when you do, not only your money runs out, but also your health runs out? So I guess, my message is save your money. You can do both.
All right. Great advice, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Craig, thanks for joining us today. Yeah, keep up the good work, man.
Yes, you too. It's my absolute favorite podcast. I love living vicariously through the true hardcores out there that you interview every week. So
that's what we like to hear.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. We'll get out there and do something special with your life. Have some fun.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and be sure to tell all your friends about the show. Everybody deserves a little adventure. Until the next episode, get out there and try something new.